Okay. I know Governor Stingel is going to join us in a second. Welcome, everyone. I hereby call the meeting to order. This is an open meeting of the Broadcasting Board of Governors. This meeting is being held in compliance with the Government in the Sunshine Act. The live webcast will also be available for later viewing on BBG website, www.bbg.gov. Today's meeting will include a deep dive on Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. This is the fifth and final BBG network deep dive and completes a process we started with VOA in December 2013. We're going to actually, just for process sake, the next board meeting, either in October or December, we're actually going to do a deep dive on IBB. And then for the board, we'll start it all over again. Since it's been a year since we did VOA, VOA will be up again in either December or February, depending on when we do the IBB deep dive. So this is a good process where once a year we'll do a deep dive on one of the networks, as opposed to when I was watching the webcast of the previous boards, there was like 2 minutes on each network. It rushed at the end of the meeting. I think this is much better, at least in my opinion. Usually when we've done RFERL, we've been in the network's headquarters, and so we once a year the board has traditionally gone to Prague in the Czech Republic, but this year for a variety of reasons we're unable to travel there, so we're doing this meeting here today in D.C., and I thank a number of the members of RFERL for coming in, and we'll also have a video link later today. And next year in 2015 we will, as a board, commit to do one of our meetings in Prague and spend a little extra time with this network. This morning, because we couldn't be there, we had a video town hall with RFERL's employees in Prague and D.C. One of the key things we did was remember Dr. Al-Shamari, who was the Baghdad bureau chief for RFERL's Radio Free Iraq, and we recognize the 60th anniversary of RFERL's Ukrainian service, Radio Svoboda, which is particularly timely given the events in the Ukraine. To open this meeting, I want to take time to report, as we usually do, on the threats to our journalists. And I want to note that it's a horrible trend. But when I first took this seat on the board a year ago, there were, I think, 3 mentions in this report. I think the initial one I got this morning was about 25 of them. This is obviously a really rough time around the world for journalists, and it seems to be getting worse. And I like the tradition we have, but I hope at some point this list gets smaller, not larger, because it's a bad trend. Honoring the courage of our reporters in the face of threats, danger, and extrajudicial detention is one of our highest priorities as an organization. And let me just give a couple of the updates. Unfortunately, I can't give the whole list anymore because it's too long, which is a bad trend. So Al Hurra correspondent Maitem Al-Shibani and an AP cameraman were embedded with an Iraqi military convoy when clashes broke out between the Iraq military and ISIS. During the 6-hour-long exchange of fire, Maitem suffered shrapnel injuries to his hand. The AP cameraman sustained injuries to his chest, back, head, and hands and is currently being treated in a nearby hospital. Fortunately, our correspondent is back to work, and we thank him for his courage. In Cuba, we've unfortunately seen a number of disturbing actions taken against citizen journalists who contribute to the Martís. During July 4th crackdown, Cuban authorities violently arrested several citizen journalists and confiscated their recording equipment, along with DVDs containing TV Martí programming. 5 reporters who frequently contribute to Martí Noticias were assaulted, and the following day, dozens of additional discs containing TV Martí newscasts were confiscated. We hope they actually watched the discs that they confiscated. Contributing reporters to OCB's citizen journalism initiative, Reporta Cuba, also faced harassment and threats. Police interrogated and threatened Redel Luis Brea under allegations that his cooperation with the Martís was to discredit the Cuban government. The parents of another Reporta Cuba collaborator, Juan Miguel Acosta Bermudez, received death threats in retaliation for their son's sharing of videos and images with the Martís. RFERL journalists continue to face threats, harassment, and danger in connection with their professional activities. We heard a little bit about that this morning. In Kazakhstan, RFERL's correspondent Orkan Besenov was detained for 4 days while reporting on a protest against Kazakhstan's entry into the Eurasian Economic Zone. In Crimea, the elderly mother of a Ukraine service stringer was harassed by Crimean police, who threatened that the FSB, Russia's security service, would retaliate against her son if he didn't stop writing bad things, quote unquote. And another RFVRL Ukrainian service journalist, Oletsky Matsuka, was among a group of 15 Ukrainian journalists who received death threats for his reporting. In Vietnam, VOA reporter Racy Polk was reporting on anti-Chinese riots, a topic that wasn't sanctioned by the Vietnamese government. Officials forced him to falsify a confession of wrongdoing before he was allowed to leave the country. And in South Sudan, a stringer for VOA's South Sudan in Focus program has been harassed by officials for his reporting on rebel activities and is now in hiding. As a board, we believe that all people have the right to free access to objective and uncensored news and information, and we strongly condemn any violence, threats, and other attempts to silence or intimidate our journalists. We call on governments worldwide to offer full protection to all working journalists and to cease interfering in reporting activities. I also want to make note of the continuing crisis in Syria, described by the Committee to Protect Journalists as the deadliest country for reporters at the moment. Next week it will have been 2 years since the disappearance of our own Al-Harraz Bashar Fahmy, who went missing while reporting in Aleppo, Syria. Today also marks the 2-year anniversary of the disappearance of U.S. journalist Austin Teese, who remains missing in Syria, along with approximately 25 other journalists as the conflict in Syria continues. Speaking on behalf of our entire board here, I call on anybody with any information on the whereabouts of these missing journalists to please come forward and contact us. And as I said, that's just a selection, unfortunately, on the list here. There's many other journalists who have been harassed and suffered things across the world. So hopefully this list is going to get smaller. Before we get to today's business agenda, I wanted to quickly recognize Voice of America's Greek service, which airs its final broadcast on Monday. Budget reductions forced the BBG to make strategic and sometimes difficult decisions about how to distribute its limited resources. The VOE Greek service was identified in the fiscal year 2014 budget for closure as part of these strategic cuts. We are very proud of this Greek service legacy dating back to World War II of bringing unbiased news and information to people who had no other reliable news source. We honor the VOA Greek service's decades of effort and achievement and wish to thank the many people who have supported this critical work. Thanks also to Governor Armstrong, who was able to take some time to meet with the service members yesterday after they recorded their final broadcast. Actually, I think it was on Monday. Yes. And we're going to talk a little bit later on budget priorities, but you can make an argument everywhere where we broadcast, we should continue to broadcast, if not augment it. And unfortunately, you can also make an argument in a lot of the places where we broadcast we should be spending more resources. And this board, one of the things that we don't enjoy doing but have to do is make choices on resources. And I know our entity heads have a more difficult assignment doing that as they look to shift resources. So it's nice sometimes to be able to declare victory and shift the resources. So thanks again to the members of the Greek service for their decades of service. With that, I want to turn to the business before the board today. The presence of 5 or more governors satisfies the board's quorum requirement. The board may conduct business based on a majority vote, a quorum being present. On July 30th, the board received by email materials for the consent agenda, allowing hopefully sufficient time for all governors to review prior to this meeting. I didn't receive any comments or questions from any of the governors on this consent agenda. And there's actually only 2 items as part of this consent agenda that we need to vote on today. One is the minutes of the June 20th, 2014 meeting. And a second is to quickly to change the meeting date in October to October 30th. The reason why we're doing this is we have an exciting panel in October. For those of us in the media business, one of the things, and I know a lot of us are in the media business, it's not just the news you report, but how you tell the story. News is about storytelling and connecting with people, and we thought it would be fun to kind of get some people from around the media business who tell stories successfully to international audiences and hear from them, whether it's movies or TV product or journalism, how they're able to connect with international audiences. So we put together a really pretty exciting panel. And for a variety of travel reasons, that day, October 30th, was the best date for this panel. So we had to shift the meeting for a couple weeks. So I know with Governor Armstrong that totally conflicts with his schedule, and I appreciate all the governors being flexible here with the scheduling of that. And I think, Matt, you're going to dial in for that or try to dial in from wherever in the world you are. So let me ask quickly if governors have any comments on either the minutes or the change in meeting. Okay, seeing none. Does any governor wish to move for the adoption of the consent agenda? Movement? So moved. Governor Stengel, any second? Second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The consent agenda is adopted. In June 2014, the BBG completed a comprehensive strategic review led by the Office of Strategy and Development, Bruce Sherman's group, that considered how the BBG mission is carried out by the networks in each target country and region. The entities and language services presented their highest priorities for the coming year in a series of regional meetings. The process took into account input from language services, network management, IBB, and selected parties in the interagency, particularly the State Department, as required by the International Broadcasting Act. At the July Advisory Committee meeting, I asked Governor Armstrong and Bruce Sherman to brief the board today on the process, outcomes, and next steps. I would note that this briefing could be a 6-hour briefing. There was a lot of work done, and I want to thank all the entities and the State Department for their work on this, as we're required to do. But fortunately, Governor Armstrong and Bruce Sherman have coalesced this down. They promised me to a short presentation. So, Matt and Bruce, why don't you guys take over here?
Thank you. While Bruce steps up and he's going to be driving the presentation, I'm going to just make a few opening comments. One is this strategic review, as Bruce will get into, was revolutionary and during the process highly evolutionary. It is a radically different process than has been before, a highly collaborative process. Also, I think as the two discussion items today, the special committees, the Shortwave Committee and this review, note that there are a number of strategic reviews that are going concurrently and they are informing each other. And as I'll get into in the Shortwave Committee presentation, we pushed and pulled on the strategy review process. But I also want to acknowledge Rob Bull's relationship and role in this country review, strategic review process. And I also want to thank Bruce and his team, and as well as the networks and the services for their participation, their work, their hard work, and the challenges that they faced in the discussion. So, Bruce, we have a short amount of time, so over to you.
Brief. We've discussed the strategy review before with the board. This is meant to be a bit of a reintroduction, simply on the process and the outcomes of the process and the next steps. We are focused here on country and regional strategies, and I'll just note what we've talked about before, which is that the BBG has done a wide range of strategic planning over many years, and the entities have been deeply involved in this. In fact, going back many years, RFE, VOA had developed their own performance plans and roadmaps that were country-based, regionally based, research-driven. So strategy has been something that the agency has been deeply involved in for many years, including overarching strategic plans for the last dozen years. What's changed now, and what was different, as Governor Armstrong was alluding to, is that this year we were very focused on specific country and regional strategies, setting goals and targets for each of our markets. And that led us into a much deeper, richer conversation than we've had in the past, country by country. We now have those goals and those targets. And we have distributed to the board members and to the entity heads this document, which is the compilation of all those goals and targets, which we won't go into. We'll just highlight today two countries, Ukraine and Venezuela, just as case studies to give a little bit of a flavor of what has come out of the process. Then, of course, we're going to be engaged in measuring how we're doing. And we have, as the board knows and the entity heads know well, they were very much involved in developing our new impact model, in which we articulate that how we gauge our performance is well beyond just the number of people we're reaching, but the impact we're having in our key markets. So country strategies, specific goals and targets, and then measurement along the lines of our research model. I won't dwell much on the challenges, only to say one thing, and that is that when you're dealing with 100 countries and every place is different and every strategy has to be different, it is an incredibly complex task that requires a lot of good data, a lot of good minds, a lot of ground truth that comes, of course, from the broadcasters, from the language service heads, from our research teams, from our marketing teams, and everyone was around the table as we sat down and went through these discussions to put their best thoughts together to determine what our strategies would be. So it was a very collaborative, a very inclusive process that has resulted in the goals and in the targets. I won't look too much at the process again, other than to say it was very rich. One point here I will emphasize, and that is that we began the process by asking each of the language services within each of the broadcasting entities to submit to us a range of strategic information, target audience, their own sense of their goals and their priorities, and we gathered all that up as a basis for conversation. Then we went into the discussions face-to-face that lasted anywhere from an hour to hour and a half to 2 and sometimes 3 hours. Out of that came the draft goals and the targets that we went back to the broadcasters and discussed further to produce a final draft. So that, in sum, is how we worked it. Again, very collaborative, very collegial, and I think successful in terms of the outcomes. So here's a specific example of what's come out of this. I won't read all of this, only to illustrate that in a very important place to us now, Ukraine. How are VOA and RFRL looking at addressing the challenges, being successful, fulfilling the mission? In the case of Ukraine, there are 4 different goals. I'll just touch on those. Advance and support the Ukrainian media industry to help build the local media market and expand news alternatives in the marketplace. One of the things that RFE and VOA are very committed to doing, and we in IBB in supporting, is developing sustainable independent media in all the countries where we operate. And that holds true in Ukraine. We've had a long, rich involvement in Ukraine for many years. When I say we, VOA and RFRL, deeply involved for many years. We have a number of excellent affiliate partners. It is a country where it's an affiliate-based model. It's a digital model as well. And we've done incredibly well. I don't know if everybody knows in the room, but since last December, VOA and RFRL, BBG as a whole, have doubled audiences in Ukraine. Now stands at 7 million. 7 million people that we reach on a weekly basis in Ukraine. And when we look at the impact beyond just that number, when we look at the scores for reliability, for credibility, for loyalty, the extent to which people are sharing information, we see very good indications that we're having a significant impact. In fact, we have received a number of comments and letters from our affiliate partners. David Ensor, NANOD, our marketing teams, Governor Armstrong was in Ukraine. We've had many people on the ground. And the Ukrainian media outlets are urging us to remain involved, to step up our involvement. And they're asking for specific kinds of content, including a coverage of corruption, and corruption not just in Ukraine. One of the interesting things that has come out of the conversations with our partners in Ukraine is that they want coverage of corruption in other countries and including the United States so that they can understand how to deal with the problem and learn from how other countries are dealing with what is an endemic problem inside their own country. So just an indication a little bit of the reach and the impact we're having, and we want to continue to do that in Ukraine. Also serving as this robust news bureau, providing information from the United States, particularly this as a Voice of America goal. Number 3, engaging young audiences and empowering citizen information exchange on digital platforms, an RFRL priority. Our overall BBG strategic plan speaks to serving underserved audiences, reaching youth and women more so than we typically do, emphasizing digital, and this goal speaks to that. And increasing our weekly reach overall by diversifying platforms and program offerings. Again, our strategy talks about optimizing the media mix, so we need to be on different platforms in countries. This is a bit of a flavor for what, in the country of Ukraine, VOA and RFRL are seeking to do. I won't get into the performance targets, Mr. Chairman, because that gets us down a little bit too far into the weeds. Let me segue to Venezuela, another obviously critically important place for us where, interestingly, despite the increasing repression in Venezuela, one would think that it would be more difficult for us to secure affiliate partners who are under pressure from the Venezuelan government. But actually, the reverse has happened. We have been incredibly successful in expanding for VOA the number of affiliate partners we have in the country. So VOA, in the strategy review, the Latin American service in Spanish emphasized the first goal, continue to produce journalism of exceptional value that responds to the mission, meets affiliate needs and audience interests, and expands credible news alternatives in the target market to enhance the audience's understanding of current events. A couple of key things in this. When you're dealing with affiliates, right, you prepare the information that your affiliates will take. You work closely with your partners, and that's true in societies that are controlled like Venezuela. We just received here in Washington 2 visitors from Venezuela that we brought up to engage in conversation with us about how we can further help them, how we can train them. And in fact, you're going to see one of the goals in the statement here is to support online information in Venezuela. Goal number 3, the development of media online, efforts to protect freedom of information currently under threat from Venezuela authorities, countering media censorship prevalent in the target market. And I'm happy to say, and Libby, you can perhaps even speak to this, you hosted the Venezuelan visitors to help them understand how to overcome censorship. So in the case of Venezuela, as in the case of Ukraine, a set of robust goals that are matched by the targets of performance. And so we have this same array of goals and targets, typically 3 to 4 for every country that we target around the world, that we reach around the world, with, again, the performance metrics that we will then go out now and implement and look at our performance, revise our plans, and come back and continue to respond to our markets, respond to the challenges. So this is just an overview, and Governor Armstrong, if you'd like to supplement this in any particular way, I'm happy to answer any further thoughts you might have.
Bruce, great, thank you. So as you heard from the presentation, this is part of a larger process. This is not, this fits into, it's nested under the agency strategy, which discussions have just started to begin, or just as relative a couple of months ago. I personally have chatted with each of the entity heads. Bruce and I have been talking. This started when Rob Bull was still here, and the board. We've talked about these things. So this is part of an ongoing process and a bunch of stages that some of which don't have necessarily the public visibility. So I just want to emphasize this was a great process, well done. And do we have a moment for a question? If there's a question from the okay. Just since chairman, I guess I am, aren't I? Hey, there we go. So, are there any questions of either me, of Bruce, or myself? All right, Bruce, thank you very much.
Thank you, and I just want to thank again. We've mentioned this in previous discussions, but the broadcasters and all the staffs that participated in this exercise. It was a all-consuming process. And just to note that we do a lot of planning in the agency, but of course we're very busy performing. And there's a tension between planning and performing, and the journalists are out there doing the job every day. So we appreciate the time that everybody spent on this.
Okay. Thank you.
Bruce, real quickly, one quick question before you leave the podium. Why do you think Venezuela, it's easy to get affiliates right now?
We asked our guests that came up, and they mentioned that that the government doesn't want to repress freedom of the press completely, that there is space to operate. And so, but it's difficult. And provided that they avoid, and this is true in so many societies where there are degrees of censorship, they avoid certain sensitive topics, they're given some latitude. So that was their answer to it.
It's weird because I know a lot of the independent stations that have been shut down, I haven't used to broadcast in that part of the world. In the private sector, it's been very restricted, in Venezuela, right. And it's a curious situation.
Well, one other thing they did say, and I passed this along in the interest, again, of trying to understand our impact. They mentioned that the work that the Voice of America does, and I put this in as a statement of fact, not in a public meeting to promote VOA per se, but this does promote VOA. This is a good indication of impact. They noted that the objectivity of the Latin American service of the Voice of America helped them in the country because they then were able to manifest that they were being impartial. They were being objective. They were allowing all sides. And the fact that the LATAM service in VOA seeks the opinion of the government gives VOA credibility with the government. So that's another reason.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. And thanks. And I want to say, echo Matt, thanks for all the hard work. I know this 15-minute summary doesn't reflect fairly the amount of months and months of hundreds of hours of work done here on this process. Michael, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Bruce had to say. I had a chance to participate either in person or phone in most of these, and appreciate how much work people do is just part of this process, never mind their day jobs. And so I know it's a lot of work. This is my 5th try at the strategy cycle, and this is the furthest down the field that we've been. Also, the Latin American strategy, I just wanted to point out the savings type of a thing. I mean, I think the agency spends like $3.5 million on Latin America. So the fact that we've got this affiliate strategy with this Washington bureau, it's one of the most efficient dollars that we use for we're 500 million of our neighbors are right here. So it's an impressive amount of accomplishment to grow that audience and in tough places on a very short dollar. So I want to congratulate people on that as well.
Great. Thank you, Michael, and I echo that. So thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Matt, for the time you spent on this. And so turning to another Matt Armstrong toil of love, or whatever we call it. So in October 2013, we established a committee on the future of shortwave radio broadcasting. Its purpose was to undertake a comprehensive review of the efficacy of shortwave radio as a distribution platform for U.S. international media. I'm going to go off script here for a second and just talk about this for a second before I hand it over to Matt. It's important to note that we talked a little bit about this in the previous session, but we in the BBG have to grapple with the continuum across both regional lines and across technical lines. So the strategy review, which we just spent 10 minutes on, was a very difficult kind of exercise in trying to figure out where do we deploy resources across the world. And there's no good answer. When you take from one, you have to, when you give to one, you have to take from another. And when you create the ability to kind of surge resources in, you need to get that ability from somewhere. So that's difficult choices happen there too. What I noted as I kind of was coming into this position was that every year in the budget for the previous 5 or 6 years, the administration or certain parts of Congress would say, cut out all shortwave radio. The first budget would have no shortwave radio in. It would get submitted. There'd be a big fight, and shortwave radio would get put back in. And I felt, as the board discussed this, we all felt that rather than kind of go through that process over and over and over again every single year until the end of time, we ought to kind of sit down, try to gather as much information as we possibly could on who was listening to shortwave and where we were deploying resources effectively. We'd like to spend every dollar for the rest of the time on that because we are reaching people there. But the question we have to make is, are we reaching enough people for the dollars, or are that dollars better spent on medium wave or television or internet? And so this was not, the idea of these committees is not to tackle easy, simple subjects. Or idea is to tackle really hard subjects. And this was a really hard subject. So I want to thank Matt in advance before he gives his report on the hard work that was done here. And I know a lot of the members of the board here have participated as we've gone through this and reviewed a lot of the information. And obviously Bruce was central to this, and Rob Bull was central to this. So they have now completed their work, which is the goal of these committees, is to get to the end and then disband. And so I'd like to invite Governor Armstrong now to make his report for the shortwave, which I know the full report's been published already. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you said, in October 2013, our 2013 board meeting, we established the Special Committee on the Future of Shortwave Broadcasting. The committee included Governors Michael Meehan, Ryan Crocker, Ken Weinstein, myself. You are ex officio, Mr. Chairman. Rick, you were the only one in this on the present board that was not on that committee.
Smartest guy here.
The committee was charged with conducting a comprehensive review, as you said, Mr. Chairman, of the efficacy of shortwave radio as a distribution platform for the BBG's networks. We did publish the report on August the 1st. It's available at our website, bbg.gov, and I'm pleased to summarize the report for those joining us here today, both in person and online. However, due to time, I can't get into detail, and nor would you want me to. So I strongly encourage you to go to the report and read it. I'm proud of the report. Of course, given more time, I would revise it and I would never finish it, but I would encourage you to read it. The U.S. government has relied on shortwave for many decades. It has been a versatile tool to widely disseminate news, policies, speeches, events, culture, and programs in technology and education. throw one little bit of history. The Congress first told us to do something in 1937 when legislation was first introduced. Shortwave was a transformational technology. It reached people around the world, including those who, because of the tyranny of distance, censorship, propaganda, they lacked access to news and information. Since the beginning, our broadcasters have used shortwave to fulfill their missions. VOA has used it to deliver news, information, and culture, including Willis Conover's jazz programs, Leo Sarkisian's Music Time in Africa. RFE was and continues to be a bright torch of hope and freedom to inform, inspire, and empower audiences through Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, the now former Soviet states, Iran, and more. Radio Free Asia reaches and inspires political prisoners and dissidents and those seeking the truth across Asia, including China, Tibet, Burma, and North Korea. Cubans have long turned to Radio Marti, and displaced peoples in Sudan listen to Radio Sawa via shortwave. Our broadcasters continue, as I just emphasized, to use shortwave. At the same time, as responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars and as leaders seeking to maximize the impact, we need to be certain that we are reaching the audiences on the platforms they use. We believe this inquiry is arguably the most in-depth, comprehensive, and inclusive analysis of shortwave that has been to date. The title of To Be Where the Audience Is means that we must right-size our shortwave. We must be on the technologies, on the platforms where the audiences are, so that our language services may be more focused and effective. The purpose of this analysis was to evaluate the platform, look at the target audiences, develop a conceptual framework to support its continuation or discontinuation in specific markets. This was an audience-first approach. We focused on the audiences in the individual markets. We sought input from across the agency, from Congress, the State Department, and the outside, to better inform ourselves. We did not take global trend data and apply it universally. We did not, for example, say shortwave is decreasing overall, so it must be decreasing in a particular target market. Instead, we had our strategy team and the networks look at specific markets and whether the target audiences rely on shortwave. Bruce and his team can attest that we kept pushing back on that and to get that understanding. Ultimately, two questions drove our work. Does the audience we are trying to reach rely on shortwave? And what, if any, are the opportunity cost of using shortwave to reach these audiences? The board just as well may have had a special committee on the future of Twitter, FM radio, or TV. We did not, because at the language service level and up, we innately ask those questions in each specific target audience, whether they use those platforms. This is where the harsh reality of the budgets come in. The possibility of blanketing every market with every possible medium simply does not exist. In today's austere fiscal environment, we need to make choices informed by the tremendous knowledge and expertise of our networks, their journalists, and the foreign policy priorities. We must be mindful that the more we spend on distribution, the less we spend on content. In the end, the investigation challenged or debunked myths around shortwave, highlighting the value in certain markets, overall caused serious discussions about the actual impact of shortwave in relation to priorities down to the level of language services. So let me talk about the process. In the first of our two public meetings, we sought to understand the medium of shortwave and ask our networks to discuss how they use shortwave to reach their audiences. Our second meeting included outside experts from Deutsche Welle, an expert formerly of the BBC, and academia. And we focused on analyzing and challenging our own research and thoughts on shortwave, specifically on the understanding of where shortwave is used and its impact. We also invited comments from outside stakeholders. This examination of shortwave was integrated with the country strategic review process. It was concurrent with committee's work where discussions on agency-level strategy, as I mentioned earlier, and analysis of analysis of staffing levels, talent management and development, especially here in the Cohen Building, continue to evolve. These all informed and at times were informed by the committee's work. The report, I want to emphasize, was not done in a vacuum. It was just one of many efforts of similar strategic and operational adjustments and reviews. I'd like to spend a moment on the input from outside the building. On behalf of the committee, I want to thank Dan Srebny for his hard work in distilling the data of what we do in each country and soliciting comments from the geographic bureaus and the Post of the Department of State on the use and impact of shortwave in their region and country, specifically the BBG's use of shortwave, as well as the audience's consumption and use of shortwave in the country. Somehow, he drove a nearly 100% response rate. I shouldn't say somehow. Of course he did. So, Dan, thank you. That was remarkable. So appreciate it. So we had a tremendous input from the Department of State. We took that response, often detailed feedback, and put it side by side with the internal analysis, the work that Bruce Bruce's team came up with. And most of the time, the department's comments concurred with our assessments. But when it did not, we went back to the department for follow-up to understand the differences. This is what I'm emphasizing is our collaborative nature and the fact that we are working across the agency to understand what's going on and challenging our own thoughts. We had conversations with congressional staff, union leadership, and outside stakeholders about our preliminary findings and about their interest. I want to thank all those who participated in those conversations for their time and insights, both in the meetings and subsequent. Now for the findings. While there continues to be a critical need for shortwave in key countries, it is a medium of marginal impact in most markets, and its use continues to decline. Even in countries where currently significant levels of shortwave usage, past trends give high confidence that these audiences will migrate to other platforms as they become more accessible. The profile of shortwave users is not well aligned with the audiences that most of our networks at the language service level are trying to reach. Many of these target audiences have viable alternative means of accessing our network's content. In many cases, the top target audiences are unlikely to rely on or even use shortwave. There is overwhelming evidence that availability of high-quality, rich content on alternative preferred platforms is primarily responsible for the declining use of shortwave. This includes migration to AM and FM radio, mobile content, television, and internet. This is accelerated by the falling prices of these other platforms. The BBG found no evidence that once an audience leaves shortwave that they return to it in a crisis or disaster. Audiences favor and continue to use their existing platforms, TV, FM, AM, mobile internet, or seek out anti-censorship tools including firewall circumvention, privacy software, offline media like USB drives and DVDs, and more, all of which the BBG provides and supports, and we are actively increasing audience awareness and availability to and use. That would be IAC and OTF initiatives, for example. Disruptions of internet and mobile technologies by governments have demonstrated to be brief and short-lived. While much fanfare surrounds the shutdowns of these connectivities, these technology services are quietly turned back on, and often very quickly. The reality is that many regimes are dependent on both the communication technologies and sometimes, ironically, the income that the mobile platforms produce. In other words, the regimes feel the collateral damage. This was the case in Syria, Egypt, Gambia, Sudan, and elsewhere. With respect to China, I would suggest that interested folks would Google the report Collateral Freedom, which our own Open Technology Fund produced last year. With regard to digital shortwave, or digital radio mondial, or DRM, it is unlikely, the committee feels that it's unlikely it will become an established platform in our target markets. The rich content from TV, FM, AM, mobile, internet, including the ability to share content and consume the content later, and the constantly dropping prices of these alternatives to shortwave and digital shortwave strongly suggest our current and future target audiences will not adopt DRM in significant enough numbers. We simply do not believe that the BBG's networks can generate enough consumer demand to affect hardware cost, supply chains, or other preferences in our target markets. And the last finding, shortwave is a relatively expensive platform to operate and maintain. So in closing, and I promise this is the closing, the committee recommends that the BBG takes an aggressive approach to reduce or eliminate shortwave broadcast where there is minimal audience reach or the audience is not a target audience based on our support of U.S. foreign policy. The committee was tasked with understanding shortwave as a medium and its efficacy. Based on our broad findings and the resulting framework of analysis, the committee finds that shortwave does continue to be a relevant and necessary platform in many places around the world. This includes North Korea, Burma, Tibet, China, Afghanistan, federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan, Cuba, much of Africa, including but not limited to Sudan, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Guinea, DRC, and northern Nigeria. As you can see, there are plenty of places that the shortwave is still in use. Examining, and we concur that it needs to maintain. Examining other transmissions through the framework developed of this report, the committee did make recommendations to discontinue other transmissions, not content. That's very important. Most of these simply reinforce what was already identified. As part of the conversation with the networks about those discontinuations and with the State Department, some of the discontinuations were delayed. I look at both of those delays or those delays as indications of how the process worked. This was a collaborative process, an iterative process, an integrated process across the interagency, and the fact that this committee is not simply making decisions in a vacuum. This was a challenging effort, as many in this room can attest. As a colleague commented outside of the scope of this work, if you are comfortable while making strategy, you probably aren't making strategy. You're just listing goals. This was indeed a strategic review, and it was, I will reiterate, done in coordination with and informed by the other strategic reviews and activities initiated this year. While we have not relied on the BBC, Deutsche Welle, Radio Netherlands, and other Western broadcasters and what they have done with regard to shortwave, we did look at their trends in shortwave and spoke directly with them about those trends. We found that what they have done is in sync with the findings. In often cases, we're actually behind the trend. It's our focus, it's our mission, it's on what we do. To wrap this up, we need to be where the audience is on the platforms they use. So before closing, I want to thank the leadership and staff that worked hard on this report. Ashley Lancaster, who did an enormous amount of work and no doubt got more than she bargained for when she volunteered to participate here. Thanks to Bruce Sherman and his team. I've already mentioned how we pushed back and challenged and got more information. Appreciate it. The role of Andre Mendez and Rob Bull cannot be understated as well, so thank you. Thanks to those outside the building who sent in their comments and those who sat down with us to share their insights. So I invite my colleagues to add any comments they might like.
Let me jump in first, and then we'll open it up. You underscored the last point, the comments. I think you got 1,600 comments or something, some ridiculous amount. There are a lot of people engaged in this process, right? As I said at the beginning, this was not an easy process. I also want to thank Ashley and Bruce and Rob and Andre for their work here. Bottom line is what the report, and not to boil the whole report down to one sentence, but basically what you guys found was that there's a number of critical regions where shortwave is still effective and an important means of communication, and there's a number of places elsewhere in the world where we're just simply not reaching enough audience to justify the cost, and we'd be better off shifting to other mediums and shifting the audience along with it. So this report doesn't make the decisions any easier. It just gives us a bit of a roadmap as a board, so we don't have to make these decisions politically every year. We can make them from a basis of fact. So I think this did exactly what we expected, and I want to thank you, Matt, for your work here and the rest of the committee, because I know people worked very hard. There were a number of meetings, and a lot of data was analyzed and reports read. So thanks to everybody on staff, and thanks from the committee doing this. So before I move on, let me just open it up if anybody else from the board wants to ask questions or say anything about the shortwave report.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for this hard work. Andre and I got to the agency about the same time, and besides sharing a love of basketball, we both came at a time and said that we got to look at ways to save money. It was clear we were going to have to do more with less, and every year he would come back and find more ways to save money while still keeping the politically important places where we do need shortwave. And I really appreciate the stakeholder effort. There's a lot of work that Matt and other members of the committee put in, but I think Andre's inspirational axe cutting all those years is coming to fruition today, so I'm glad we're both sitting here as the moment has happened. So thank you for your hard work, and thank you, Matt, for your hard work as well.
Well, I'll just close with, I offer that the work of the special committee on the future shortwave broadcasting is complete. We're done.
You're not done. We're just starting. It's giving us a blueprint. So just to remind everybody, the bylaws that we adopted earlier this year to have committees stand up and stand down, it's, I think, within my power as chair now to dissolve the Shortwave Committee, which I hereby do. So thank you, Shortwave Committee. The good news for all of you, if you're looking for some time on the beach or some leisure time, is we have a number of other important and equally controversial and difficult matters that we as a board need to help management with. So at the advisory committee in early October, we're going to be reviewing as a committee some of the other standing committee ideas that have been suggested and standing them up, and we will be at the next board meeting hopefully announcing at least one committee to replace the Shortwave Committee and help management do its important work. So that'll be the focus of the next advisory committee meeting. And as I mentioned in the last meeting, if there's any other suggestions that either management or the board or any member of staff or the public has, about additional committees, let us know. We certainly have a long list of ideas already, though. So let me tell everybody that. So I want to go away from my scripts, my comments one more time to just talk a little bit about one other thing. So as you know, as the board knows, and as everybody here knows, when Dick Lobo left, which I believe was January, was his last month. I don't remember. It feels like about 10 years ago, but it was November. So it's been 9 months, and at the time we decided as a board to put in place kind of a novel group of individuals, 3 individuals to run this agency, and we tried to choose 3 individuals that were dynamic leaders. And I personally, in the private sector, have never seen a troika or whatever we call it. I think there's been different words to describe this team as we've started. It's hard to have a group of 3 people. It's hard to have a group of 2 people, let alone 3 people, work to run an organization. And I just wanted to say a couple words about that group and also an update on one of the prior members of that group. So let me first talk. Rob Bowl. He was a temporary position. His position expired, I believe, about 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago or something like that. And Rob left the agency at that time. We, as a board, felt we needed to have a global strategy position, a permanent one, which we put in place and took applications. And yesterday the board decided to offer Rob this permanent job to come back to the agency as the director of global strategy. I don't think we formally made him the offer. The offer is being prepared, but and I don't know whether he'll take it. I'm hopeful that he'll take it to come back to the agency and rejoin the Troika, or IMT as they choose to be called. But Rob did a wonderful job when he was here as part of it. Hopefully in the future he'll continue to do a wonderful job guiding our strategy in place. But I also want to recognize Andre and Susie. Andre, yesterday Andre took the board through a budget briefing. It was as good as any budget briefing I've seen in this organization or in the private sector in my career. And this is a very, very difficult organization. So this was collaborative this year. I've heard from a number of the entity heads that they were very pleased with the process. Always there's difficult decisions we have to make in the budget process, but our position as a board is that the more we can do out in the open so that people know the difficult decisions, the more we can work together to solve the problems we've got. And I think Andre and Susie and Rob, when he was here, are absolutely executing that thing. So commendations, Andre. I want publicly to you to thank you for leading this process and doing an absolutely phenomenal job. And obviously Susie has been juggling a lot of things, not the least of which is all of us. And the communication to the Hill as 4490 has proceeded and all the other stuff. So I just wanted to publicly say in front of everybody that we're really pleased with how this interim management team has operated. And while we still desperately need a CEO to drive this organization forward, I echo Michael's words from earlier. I think this has worked out for the organization and for the country, about as best as can be managed. So hopefully Rob will rejoin the Troika, as I like to call it. I'm the only one. But commendations, Andre, to you and to Susie for the work that you've done. Matt, I think wanted to jump in.
Real quick, I guess I still have the title, liaison to the IMT, not liaison to Troika. I think it's the IMT. I just want to really quickly reiterate what you said and jump on that. Andre, terrific work. Susie, terrific work. And when Rob was still with us, terrific work as well. And this really has, we talk once a week, if not more sometimes. It's making the trains run, so appreciate it.
Great. So, as you know, we allow and encourage members of the public to come speak to us as a board. For months, we've been hoping that we would fill all 10 slots, and usually we only get 1 or 2. Today we have 2, so we're making a little bit of progress. But before I invite the 2 members of the public to come up and address the board, I would also urge, we want to hear from everybody. So if people have things that they want to tell us or ask us, please come to the meeting. Please sit in the seat at the end and talk to us. This is an important part of the board meeting, and we're thrilled to have 2, not just 1 today, but we hope to have 10 at some point in the future and hear from a number of people. So Today we have two registered, Jim Malone, our own Jim Malone, and Ann Noonan. So let me start with Jim. Why don't you come to the table and address the board, and thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, Chairman Schell, members of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Jim Malone. I'm the national correspondent in the Central Newsroom. I've worked as a journalist at VOA for the past 31 years. VOA's first broadcast was in German, but the sentiment was uniquely American. The news may be good or bad for us. We shall tell you the truth. More than 7 decades later, through the crucibles of the Cold War, Vietnam, Watergate, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, VOA's commitment to credible news remains its lifeblood and an essential part of attracting a worldwide audience of more than 160 million. Unfortunately, the future of VOA's journalistic credibility is now in question as Congress moves to reform U.S. international broadcasting. In recent weeks, scores of VOA journalists and broadcasters from Central News, the English Division, and many of our language services have come together concerned about the recently passed House Bill H.R. 4490. We believe that requiring VOA journalists and broadcasters to not only report on, but promote U.S. foreign policy would undermine our news credibility with overseas audiences, as would taking direction from the CIA and the Pentagon. Restricting VOA to domestic news and policy would bring to a close decades of credible, compelling, on-the-scene news and analysis from around the world. Now, VOA is no stranger to criticism over the years. As one notable visitor once put it, I know that there are those who are always critical of The Voice, but I believe that over the years, faced with this very difficult challenge, you've been able to tell our story in a way which makes it believable and credible. And that is what I hope you will continue to do in the future. The date was February 26, 1962. The place was the VOA Auditorium, 2 floors down. The speaker was President John F. Kennedy. VOA journalists welcome thoughtful, rational reform, but not at the cost of losing our journalistic credibility. VOA can and must do better, but it doesn't need a new mission. We respectfully ask that this board do what it can to safeguard VOA's journalistic credibility and the VOA Charter in whatever legislation finally emerges from Congress. Let's keep VOA the voice, not a government mouthpiece. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And tell you're a journalist. That was well written and well said. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
You got it right.
Ann, why don't you join us at the table? Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by asking why the BBG's legal department has still not complied with its request to provide the remaining pages for our Freedom of Information request of September 19th, 2013, which asked for copies of all the former IBB directors' emails about a former IBB governor. Can the governors please let CUSIB know when these documents will be provided? The Broadcasting Board of Governors should immediately do something about the management meltdown at Voice of America. How can Voice of America not update its Kurdish service website, Facebook, and Twitter for up to 11 hours, while tens of thousands of Kurdish-speaking refugees are being pursued by Islamic fighters, stranded without food on a mountain, and being supplied by U.S. military in one of the greatest humanitarian tragedies of recent years? How could VOA and IBB management allow this to happen? Let me also point out that as late as 2 weeks ago, the agency's bureaucracy talked about and wanted to cut all VOA Kurdish shortwave radio transmissions. The only link now to these refugees without food and electricity perhaps some with battery-operated radios. VOA senior executives are not in touch with their language services and are not helping to guide them and provide them with resources at critical moments for international audiences and for the United States. It took VOA Kurdish service a few hours to report Saturday online on President Obama's major statement on humanitarian situation in Iraq, and when it did, it had only 4 short sentences. VOA English News had only 1 sentence on the meeting Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes had last week at the White House with members of the Iraqi Yazidi community to discuss the humanitarian situation in northern Iraq, particularly as it impacts the Yazidi community and other ethnic and religious minorities, including Christians, Turkmen, and Shabak. Every day there are examples of VOA News failures, such as not reporting at all on House Foreign Affairs Committee testimony last week by a former Syrian army photographer about evidence of killings and torture by the Syrian regime. A meeting Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes had with the former Syrian army photographer who documented crimes in Syria was not reported by VOA English News. In another incident, VOA interrupted live radio transmissions to Africa of President Obama's major speech about Africa and failed to report on critical comments on U.S. African policy from key members of Congress, including Senator Menendez and Congressman Royce. Just 2 days ago, VOA English News reported inaccurately on the UN report about casualties in eastern Ukraine and gave a boost to propaganda from the Russian government by its inaccurate reporting. This is happening at VOA again and again. There's a breakdown of leadership, management, and editorial controls at the Voice of America, and the BBG must take immediate steps to address this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. And thanks for being here. So we're going to take a short recess now called 10 minutes, governors and everybody, so we can prepare for the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty presentation. So John and Anat, it's your show. So take 10 minutes. We'll be back in 10 minutes here.